Welcome, everyone. We begin with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the latest there is that thousands of Russian soldiers have already called a Ukrainian hotline to surrender in a fresh humiliation for Putin's army, and this according to officials. Now, Andriy Yuskov, a spokesman for Ukraine's military intelligence, said that in just a few weeks, some 2,000 people have called the I Want to Live hotline in order to give themselves up. Calls have come from soldiers in Ukraine, those still in Russia who have been conscripted, and some who have not even received draft orders yet, who wanted to check the procedure. It comes after Putin ordered 300,000 conscripted men to be sent to the front lines in Ukraine in order to prop up the invasion. Meanwhile, Ukraine's State Emergency Service recovered a woman's body from under the rubble after a military strike hit Zaporizhia city center in southeast Ukraine and destroyed residential buildings. The regional governor said via telegram that emergency workers rescued 21 people in total. He added that one woman was killed and 7 people were wounded. It is not clear whether the recovered body of the woman was one mentioned by the governor or if it was another victim. There was no immediate comment on the strike from Russia, whose invasion has begun to unravel after a Ukrainian counteroffensive in which thousands of square miles of territory have been retaken since the start of September. And for the men leaving Russia after vast journeys across the world's biggest country, there is now often a final ordeal. Fear at the border, followed by a rush of relief for those who reached the other side. Hundreds of thousands of men have left Russia since President Vladimir Putin declared the special military operation in Ukraine. Some feared they would be called up to fight. Others simply sought new lives after special military operation changed Russia more dramatically than any time since 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, after Putin announced a partial mobilization of reservists last month, Russia's first since World War II, the trickle of immigrants turned into floods, and mundane border anxiety turned into fear for thousands of men who rushed to the exits. It began a 4,300-kilometer odyssey out of Russia, some eyewitnesses saying that it's a break with their homeland, and it's shaping the lives of entire generations of urban Russians and also their families. A direct flight to Kazakhstan, for example, for one man who says his relatives was impossible due to high demand, and so he flew to Kazan, that is southwest Russia, and tens of thousands of kilometers east to Byrd in the Altai region of Siberia for safety. Russian suicide drones hit Kharkiv early today, damaging industrial objects but leaving no casualties. Oleh Sinebov, head of the region's military administration, police investigative department chief, said there is information that the weapons that hit Kharkiv may be Iranian-made Shahed type of drones. Now, he said, today we have the engine of this drone electronic board, which gives us the reason to believe that this probably a Shahed type drone. One of the locations that was hit was an oil base. The deputy manager of the oil base said the security staff heard a sound of a scooter before the explosions. According to him, there was no fuel, or the reservoirs were empty, and they have been empty for a couple of months. Iran denies supplying the drones to Russia, where the Kremlin has not commented. Ukrainian forces appear to have been caught on the back foot by the drones, which Kyiv says Russia started using on the battlefield in September. And on the side of the economy, Russia's President Vladimir Putin said today that consumer demand remained weak and that he expected sanctions pressure on the Russian economy to intensify. And this was in a televised remarks from a meeting with government officials. According to him, in general, the situation here is stable. At the same time, it is important to understand that the sanctions pressure on Russia will only increase. The West hit Moscow with unprecedented sanctions after Russia sent tens of thousands of troops to Ukraine February 24 in what it calls a special military operation. But the Russian army or rather Russian economy has defied some predictions from Western analysts that it is facing a 15% hit to gross domestic product GDP this year. Russia's economy ministry now expects a 2.9% contraction in 2022, while Western leaders hope the impact of sanctions will be long-lasting and hold back the Russian economy for years. We'll talk some more about the latest in this war, Russia and Ukraine. Joining us is a lawyer, also foreign affairs analyst, Michel Agatishe. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Millicent, for having me.
All right, let's begin. What are your thoughts on the situation on ground in Ukraine? I mean, we've heard this week Russia Ukraine is advancing, taking up, some of those places that Russia stronghold, that Russia's, threatening that it's going to come back and, take them back. And then we're hearing, about those places that have also been annexed. What are your thoughts on perhaps who's winning this war as it stands?
Well, thank you, Millicent. I think that my thoughts aren't really about who's winning this war, but about the fact that it appears that finally we may be seeing an end to the war. For one thing, I'm very pleased about the communities that have now been liberated, for lack of a better word. And it appears that the momentum is now on the side of Ukraine. But within that is that there is even greater risk for the world at the moment, with Vladimir Putin saying that he's now willing to defend Russian territory with everything in the arsenal, including nuclear weapons. Now, in light of the fact that recently there has been the annexation of, those territories within Ukraine, wherein Ukraine is now advancing and liberating, question now becomes, will he make good his promise? And is he willing to utilize nuclear weapons, such as not to prevent an embarrassing defeat to Ukraine? So that is something of trepidation, if you ask me.
One analyst says that Ukraine has already achieved its primary political objective of showing the West that it can take back territory and using the weapon systems provided to do that. But some others are perhaps just saying, with what happened last night, and that's the bombardment in Zaporizhia, maybe not.
Well, how I see it is that this is a case where I don't believe the objective of the Ukrainian people is to show the West that they can utilize the weapons. I think for the Ukrainian people, it's an existential threat, right? And it's them trying to defend their land. And I think that they're doing it quite admirably, to the extent that they are basically facing down one of the superpowers of the world and handing what is increasingly becoming embarrassing defeat. Yes, there was bombardment yesterday, but also today, I believe the Ukrainian army also advanced into Kherson as well as Luhansk. These are areas that had been under the control of Russia for the longest time, and these are areas that have recently been annexed as well. So it is the case that, yes, of course, they have been able to demonstrate, really, that there's a lot of resolve in their army, and that with more weapons, they really can stand up to the Russians. And that is an interesting reality, because I'm not sure at the start of the war that anyone would have given them such a fighting chance as has now been given.
Give us the perhaps legal perspective. Just today, we heard that the 4 Ukrainian regions have begun to appear on Russia's television's weather forecasts, as part of Russia. I mean, some argue that Russia says it has a right to do this, it's done it, they're now part of it, but we really don't know to what extent. But legally speaking, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, well, I mean, legally speaking, under international law, right, the right to self-determination and political participation is one of those, people's political, economic, social, and cultural destiny aspirations that are recognized as rights. That being said, international recognition of referendums tend to only follow if the referendum is conducted in accordance with certain international standards. So, for example, the referendum needs to be held in a peaceful environment. Civil and political rights must be effectively protected. Voter qualification must be based on reasonable criteria. The question must be clear, and it should be monitored by international observers, among a number of other things. We all know that all those preconditions which I stated, to a large extent, were not followed during the referendums that resulted in the annexation of those regions of Ukraine. And in fact, because of that reason, there has been no international recognition of the fact that those areas are now a part and parcel of Russia. So from a legal basis, it stands on very, very shaky grounds. And it is for that reason that you have not seen any international recognitions of that. And this also really goes even as far back as, was it 2014 or 13, with the annexation of Crimea, which also has not received any international recognition. So it is the case that on the de jure basis, yes, there's no recognition. Yes, it may be seen as not being legal, but we do understand that, sometimes these issues also have de facto implications. And that's how we see, for example, that Crimea has more or less been run by Russia ever since 2014. So legally, it is shaky ground, but it remains to be seen what the factual reality will become in the coming months and years.
And perhaps those are actually my fears, because if Crimea existed in such a way to the international community and nothing was done, and now
yes.
No one to call Russia's bluff, his annexed 4 regions already. So what is going to happen, really?
Yeah, I mean, what is going to happen, really? It's something that it remains to be seen. One of the basis upon which international law is enforced, beyond the International Court of Justice, is the fact that you also have to look at political power. Unlike the situation with Crimea, yes, there were sanctions that followed it, but, the world, the international powers, to a large extent, were still having relationships with Russia. At this point in time, it appears that maybe, just maybe, there might be widespread condemnation. But again, we know that maybe that will not be the case, as there are power blocks in the world, and within those power blocks, there might still be those who will align with the Russian cause and then give a form of legitimacy, although it may not become de jure, but may result in de facto ownership thereon. Just a word on that also. I'm not sure if you've also seen what Elon Musk had proposed vis-a-vis a potential midway point, almost basically saying that there should then be, a proper referendum to see indeed if those regions want to move. I believe in the middle of war, maybe that's not a question you would want to have, because it takes away the precondition of a peaceful environment. But what is clear to me is that, anything that happens from here on out will always be tainted by the fact that it resulted from aggression from one side to the other.
That is true. And of course, we've heard Russia's president say that the situation in his country is stable, even though we're also hearing that there is a, call for help, helpline, Russians calling in for Ukraine to save them, help them, that they do not want to be conscripted. Talk to us about Zaporizhia region. There are fears that, this happened in an oil base, but then that is also where you have the biggest nuclear power plant. Do you think that perhaps this war might indeed go nuclear at any point?
Well, I pray that it doesn't. I pray that it doesn't go nuclear. I believe that we are basically seeing the very edges of brinkmanship in a manner that we have not seen since 1945. The statements of President Putin in recent times has increasingly been more, should I say, antagonistic and suggestive of potentially deploying nuclear weapons. We both haven't been alive to see the impact of nuclear weapons, but we still know what happened in Nagasaki as well as Hiroshima. And the scale, or rather the types of nuclear weapons that are available now are about 100 times more deadly than those which were dropped on those two cities. So from that perspective, these are bombs that can wipe out entire civilizations. And I don't believe that we want to see that happening, because maybe we may be closer to Armageddon than we ever thought we would be. So let's hope that that doesn't happen, Millicent.
Indeed, we really hope that it doesn't. But in terms of negotiations, I know that Turkey had, said that it was going to help broker that. A decree was signed by Ukrainian president saying that, after that annexation, he didn't want to have a face-to-face with President Putin. Do you think that that could still happen anytime with the way things are?
Well, I don't think it could happen. Recently, President Zelensky has also stated that he's not willing to come back to the negotiating table, particularly in light of the further actions that have been taken. On Putin's part, in his speech annexing, he had said that, well, they should come back to the negotiating table and not, in his words, continue to be used as cannon fodder. I don't know if the Turks will continue to have that much appetite to play a negotiating role, because even after the annexation, Turkey, right, Ankara, that's basically the capital, officials therefrom, widely condemned the annexation and, articulated that it was actually problematic in the face of negotiations. There's a concept we have in law and also in international law, which is about equality of arms. And on that basis, right, it appears that everything that is being done, particularly from the Russian side, demonstrates that even if you come to a negotiating table, when you're holding several regions to ransom, then of course there is no equality of arms. And there's a question as to what exactly will be the type of negotiations that will be had. That being said, if we're able to see negotiations that both parties can come in an honest manner, discuss, and have a solution, of course, that would be the best for all persons. It's never good for people to have to die on the basis of ideals that they might not know. I mean, you spoke about people being conscripted in Russia, and if you saw, immediately after those conscription announcements were made, thousands of people had to flee from Russia, not wanting to fight in this war. So there's a lot of disruption that goes on underneath, and it's not something that we ever want to experience. And it's for that reason that it remains our hope that the war comes to an end as quickly as possible. There have been things that I would say would become the precedents for international law in the future, but unlike local law, where you have clear enforcement mechanisms and clear police people who enforce the law, international law depends on the, adherence to principles by nations. And when you have big nations like Russia basically tearing up the rule book, then of course it becomes problematic to even discuss these issues from a lens of what the law says, rather than seeing it as it unfolds and hoping that loss of life does not become so much that becomes a stain on our collective history as a world, as would be the case if another nuclear bomb were to drop for the first time since Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Hopefully not. We always appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Michel Agatishe is a lawyer and foreign affairs expert. Always a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Millicent. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Can the European Union and its neighbours from Britain to Turkey are meeting to discuss shared security and energy problems stemming from Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in a rare and symbolic summit of 44 European countries, but not Russia. The Prague gathering is the inaugural summit of the European Political Community, EPC, a format that is a brainchild of French President Emmanuel Macron and brings together the 27 European Union members with the 17 other European countries. Some of them are waiting to join the bloc, while another, Britain, is the only one ever to leave it. The brainchild of French President, the EPC brings together these member states, including those that we've mentioned. An EU diplomat said the gathering of so many leaders in Prague would send a very strong signal to Russian President of the opposition to the war unleashed in Ukraine after his February invasion. Diplomats saying no such Europe-wide grouping exists, and this is a good moment to forge one as the whole continent grapples with consequences of the war, including the threat to peace and security and an economically devastating energy crisis.
Russia's action from the last week confirmed it yet again. Holding the referenda in occupied territories was a dirty trick. The international community cannot take it seriously. Many of you have the similar experiences in the history of your countries. We understand it is tough to face evil, but we also understand that truth does win. It can take time, but in the end, we all know in our hearts that Ukraine will win, because the truth is on their side. We are certainly not going to establish another European organization. We are not going to replace the existing formats of cooperation. We have plenty of them already. We will not even be adopting any official resolutions today. The point is simple: to have an honest discussion on the matters of common interest, but also on disputed topics. There are so many challenges to our prosperity that require our cooperation. I have already mentioned the need to find peace and security, but it doesn't end here. There is also inflation and high energy prices causing worse living standards in Europe. There is our dependence on imported resources, threatening our energy.
Well, here's a recap of some of the key events of the developing story in Thailand, a shooting that occurred northeast of the country. We understand a gunman killed at least 37 people in an attack at a children's daycare center in Nong Bua Limphu province. He subsequently opened fire on and crashed his vehicle into a crowd of bystanders before returning home and killing his wife and child. Police said the gunman, who has been named by Thai police as former policeman Piana Kamrab, that he then shot himself dead. He had been dismissed from police. The gunman's child was also a regular pupil at the daycare center. World leaders have been offering their condolences, their sympathies to the victims of the attack. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss said she was shocked to hear of the horrific events. Australian leader Anthony Albanese said it was impossible to comprehend the heartbreak and said all Australians send their love and condolences. Well, joining us right now is VOA's Tommy Walker, who is in Bangkok at the moment. Tommy, thank you for joining me. What more are we learning about this ugly incident at the school in Thailand?
Well, I mean, we're just learning about, the details of how this horrific, incident has unfolded. Like you said, this ex-police officer has, went into a daycare center, frustrated that he couldn't find his son, and then got stressed and then began firing at people and attacking children and adults, some who were pregnant, some children who are 2 years old. So we're just really finding out the remainder of the details here, but investigators are still continuing to see what the motive was.
Indeed, because, I mean, we're learning he was also a former police officer who was dismissed. Did we know if he perhaps had any mental issues?
It hasn't really been mentioned at the moment. I mean, the chief of police came out tonight and said that they believe that he might have been under the influence of amphetamine. This police officer was suspended and then fired for drug allegations by the force this year, and he was actually in the proceedings of trial in court. So that's what we're hearing at the moment. In terms of mental health, nothing's been mentioned, but I'm sure that'll be investigated in due course.
In terms of what the government is doing, I mean, Thailand's Prime Minister, has he said anything about this?
He made a Facebook post and said it was shocking, and he's sent his condolences to the families. He's ordered the authorities to prioritise the investigation of why and what happened. And himself, he's flying to the province tomorrow to see the families and obviously and the incident and where it happened.
And in terms of the location, how close is it to where you are?
I'm in Bangkok. It's about 310 miles. So, about 8 hours drive, 1 hour flight. So it's in the northeast of Thailand, quite a peaceful area, lots of mountainous and, ranges and national parks. So it's quite far away from the Thai capital.
Have you heard from perhaps those around you how they're feeling about, such a horrendous thing that has happened, what the mood is?
I mean, the mood is just shock. It's such a horrific incident. I mean, especially with the children, so many children being killed by one individual. It's really sent shockwaves across the country. And I think people are just wondering why, and then obviously it comes into question about the gun laws in Thailand. So there's a lot of questions unanswered at the moment, but the feeling around Thailand and in Bangkok is just horror and shock.
Do we know if there have been any previous cases of this nature?
I mean, there was a mass shooting in 2020, February 2020, which at the time was Thailand's worst mass shooting. So it's the second time in just under 3 years this has happened. The one in 2020 happened in Korat, which again was an ex-army soldier who decided to open fire on his comrades and people in shopping malls. So it's the second time in 3 years that Thailand's seen such a mass shooting. And even though mass shootings in Thailand are quite, they are rare, questions need to be asked why this has happened again so soon.
Very true. Thanks, Tommy, for talking to us about this. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We go over to the United States, where President Joe Biden met with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to tour the devastation left behind from Hurricane Ian and stress the need for united federal and state efforts for recovery. Now, he's a Democrat, and DeSantis, his potential Republican presidential rival, have clashed over issues including COVID-19 vaccines, climate change, abortion, LGBT rights. But during the visit, they said differences aside, as President Biden pledged federal support for a cleanup, rebuilding effort that could cost taxpayers billions of dollars and could also take years. Biden and DeSantis greeted each other warmly and stood shoulder to shoulder as they met with victims of the hurricane. The President and First Lady Jill Biden arrived in Fort Myers Beach early Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after visiting Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory battered by Hurricane Fiona last month. While chatting with a well-wisher following his speech, Mr. Biden was caught on a hot mic using salty language. More than 100 people died. Nearly 400,000 homes and businesses remained without power in Florida 5 days after Hurricane Ian crashed across the state.
We're thinking of you, and we're not leaving. We're not leaving until this gets done. I promise you that. You know, when you walk around here, what's left of Fisherman's Wharf, and you don't have to have much of an imagination to understand that everything is historic, titanic, and unimaginable storm just ripped it to pieces. You got to start from scratch. Got to move again. And it's going to take a lot of time, not weeks or months. It's going to take years for everything to get squared away in the state of Florida. But we know the feeling, that feeling about where am I going to put my head down on a pillow tonight? How's that going to work? Is my kid going to be okay? Is he going to be able to go back to school? Am I going to be able to build my home? Will the insurance cover it? If I don't have insurance, God knows, what am I going to do? And, you know, we're working to speak to all those issues because they all warrant immediate responses. I've instructed my administration to bring every element, I mean every element of the federal government together to help with immediate needs and long-term rebuilding. You know, today we have one job and only one job, and that's to make sure the people of Florida get everything that they need to fully, thoroughly recover. We're one of the few nations in the world that on the basis of the crisis we face, we're the only nation that comes out of it better than we went into it. And that's what we're going to do this time around, come out of it better, because this is the United States of America, and I emphasize united.
U.S. President Joe Biden. Maria Byrd, our Washington, D.C. correspondent, joins me now with what's happening there. Maria, thanks for joining me. Talk to us. First, we would like to know, what was that? I believe it was said that the president there was a salty language, a hot mic using salty language. What was that about?
Well, you know, there was quite a bit of, I think, conversations around kind of what exactly was happening. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, go ahead.
There was quite a bit of conversation around exactly what the full perspective. So I think the president was just responding to some comments that were made there more specifically.
Talk to us about the relief efforts, you know, after Hurricane Ian.
The relief efforts have been quite vast. Since Hurricane Ian, the U.S. has had to put forth a lot of their emergency response systems. The FEMA has been very much on the ground. As you all have heard the president say before, the U.S. is not going to at all to come back from this. I think the federal government is going to put everything they have, every resource they have to be able to support the efforts. And so what we're seeing now is this is potentially going to be one of the most expensive relief efforts. Over $10 billion is expected to be spent on the relief efforts. We've had hundreds that have obviously died, unfortunately, as a result of this storm. But the infrastructure is the areas that are going to have to be really worked on.
We're hearing there might be some potential racial disparity in the relief going out.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is there are several communities in the Fort Myers area of Florida that are predominantly African-American and those of minority descent. And so those individuals have been stating that they have been left out of many of the actual assistance efforts to those communities, because some of them are still in homes that have been flooded, not having resources to be able to move to other locations. And so there is a large amount of support being put out to see how to address some of the racial disparity issues that have been brought forth.
We're also told that, you know, the president, a Democrat, and Florida's governor, a Republican, you know, stood side by side and put, you know, their differences, and then also to face this particular issue, the cleanup and the relief. But then we also heard that the governor had played on immigration fears with this hurricane aftermath.
Well, you know, anytime you have a failing infrastructure and you have some type of disaster such as this, you do potentially leave yourself open for risk of things occurring that are unexpected. And I think that what they're speaking directly of is kind of the water and the borders there. If individuals will try to escape countries that are not too far from the Florida region in the U.S. and able to obviously get to the U.S. by boat. The Border Patrol has not stated that they have any sort of a shortage in patrol support. As we know, the hurricane is over at this point, so the waters can be patrolled as they were previously. So what we'll probably be seeing over the next couple of months is potentially some immigration challenges, but nothing to the extent that I think is being projected, just due to the fact that it's really pretty much being able to protect the water borders. When you talk about Florida, there's no entry, directly by land that we are looking at.
And Maria, let's talk about another thing, and this is what appears to be facing Europe and perhaps other parts of the world, the energy crisis. We understand that prices are rising as well in the U.S.
Yeah, so gas prices overnight in just one night have gone up by almost 20 cents per gallon. And so when we look at those gas prices, we know that we are definitely looking at potentially it being an impact from the crude oil prices. We have seen a stronger stock market, but we still know that we're dealing with some inflation issues in the U.S. The president had released some reserves a few months back, so the question is that going to be released again? Is he going to then go into reserves again to be able to address some of these gas prices? We also know that it's timing. We are entering into the holiday season. We've already heard that travel is going to be far more expensive than it's been over the past few years. And so what we're looking at potentially is that, this is just a direct relationship to what we're seeing with escalating airfare prices, and now gas prices will increase, all due to the fact that we are entering into the holiday season.
Maria, thanks for that update. Do stay safe. Well, let's go over to other stories now, this time in Africa, Ethiopia. The United Nations spokesperson has referred to ongoing violence that is happening there as saddening and shocking after the latest attack in which more than 50 people were killed in an airstrike. The attack on Tuesday hit a school in northern Ethiopia's Tigray region that was sheltering people displaced by conflict between the federal and regional governments. The airstrike in the town of Adidero, some 40 kilometers from the border with Eritrea, appears to be one of the deadliest carried out during the nearly 2-year war, which has killed thousands and also uprooted millions.
We've always been extremely supportive of the African-led initiatives to bring the sides together in Ethiopia, to see an end to the violence and the armed conflict that we've seen there, which has impacted millions of people. I mean, just yesterday, I think I gave you a pretty detailed humanitarian update, and the kinds of numbers that we keep talking about every week are frankly saddening and shocking for what is, at the end, a man-made humanitarian crisis. It is important that we see a cessation of hostilities. The Secretary General has called for them and continues to call for them. It is also important for all the parties to protect civilians, to protect civilian infrastructures. We have seen in numerous situations civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, being targeted.
Still in Africa, a United Nations report says the vast majority of cases of torture in the Democratic Republic of Congo have occurred in areas affected by conflict. The report issued by the UN's mission in Congo and its Human Rights Office in the country documents more than 3,600 cases of torture committed between 2019 and 2022. It identified almost 5,000 victims of abuse, including hundreds of cases of sexual violence. Acts of torture or other cruel treatment were committed by the Congolese armed forces as well as other armed groups. The report says there is widespread impunity in conflict zones, with less than 100 convictions over the 3-year period.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo, the report today released by the UN Joint Human Rights Office and the Peacekeeping Mission documented at least 3,126 cases of torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment throughout the country between April 2019 and April 2022. 93% of these incidents occurred in conflict-affected provinces. According to the report, the main perpetrators were armed groups, notably Nyatura, the Mai Mai groups, and allied democratic forces, who committed over 1,800 of these acts. A total of 1,293 violations were attributed to state agents. The report also documented 492 sexual exploitation incidents of torture and other cruel and inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment. The UN mission will continue to support the government's efforts to uphold human rights and to end impunity, including through capacity building. The mission continues to pursue its efforts to protect civilians in the eastern parts of the country. A joint UN mission and armed forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo Patrol has been sent to North Kivu after presumed forces from the Allied Democratic Forces attacked Vido near Oicha in Beni territory. This took place yesterday, and the attack triggered a population displacement towards the nearby settlement of Chabi. And the armed forces, the nearby settlement of Chabi, and also towards the armed forces of the DRC camp. Initial reports indicate that 8 civilians were killed and at least 10 houses and schools were torched by assailants.
Meanwhile, the Sudanese Red Crescent Society, SRCS, says heavy rains and flash floods in Sudan have caused devastation in many parts of the country. This has left 80,000 families in need of humanitarian assistance, according to the charity body.
In the famine village of Zayed in South Darfur, tens of thousands of homes, boreholes and agricultural fields have been destroyed or damaged over the past months in what residents say is the worst flooding in a decade.
We have seriously been affected. My rooms, my house is damaged. All the furniture was damaged and carried away by water. This room is now completely destroyed. Yesterday, that water came inside the house. It broke everything, and now I have many cracks in the walls. All my beds are broken, and all my jerry cans have been carried away by the flow. I didn't manage to recover anything.
In Zayed village, floods also damaged essential infrastructure, increasing the risk of waterborne diseases such as cholera.
The water came under the control room, and the borehole collapsed, and all the water pipes were broken. All the pipes served in the side and that side, going south, north, and east.
So now we're here, in this very basic shelter. Even plastic sheets we received were not enough. This is all what people can get now, and we don't know what to do. We lost everything, and this is where we're staying for now.
Abba's family now lives in a makeshift shelter after their home was destroyed. Communities are not only facing climate shocks, but conflict and violence, as well as poor harvests and skyrocketing food prices. Over the past year, the International Committee of the Red Cross has recorded a 187% increase in the price of basic food items in conflict-affected areas of Sudan, where it works. This brutal inflation is still rising.
This season is different from the past seasons. Our oldest people say that nothing like this has happened since the 1980s. This year there is much more water. In Southern Darfur, rain rates this fall are above normal rates.
The United Nations said nationwide, more than 150,000 people have been affected by flooding this year, double the number at the same stage of last year's rainy season.
And French author Annie Ernaux has won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Literature for the courage and clinical acuity in her largely autobiographical books examining personal memory and social inequality. In explaining its choice, the Swedish Academy said the 82-year-old's consistently and from different angles examines a life marked by strong disparities regarding gender, language and class. The first French woman to win the Literature Literature Prize, Knö said winning was a responsibility. Her debut novel was Le Amour Vide in 1974, but she gained international recognition following the publication of Le Anis in 2008, translated into the years in 2017. Born to a modest family from Normandy, northern France, Knö wrote about class and how she struggled to adopt the codes and habits of the French bourgeois while staying true to her working class background.
She's a well-known writer in Europe and all over the world right now, and I think that particularly her great book Les Années that made her a famous writer, and it's very interesting that it has been so influential also for younger generation writers right now, not only in France, but also these shorter works, early works. They are so wonderful when she tries to really give a portrait of her parents and the whole milieu where she comes from, and the difficulties to change class and move from these poor conditions to the life as a writer. It's a long path that she makes in her life. I think it is her language very much that she's so frank and direct and honest in her way of expression, and also that she writes about themes and topics that no one else touches on. That she's a courageous woman, and that we have also in our motivation, the courage, which I think is quite striking in her.
Is that the line there? Yeah, then 50 mil of that, and then we're going to say thank you, miss you.
Finally on the programme, Kate Middleton, Prince Williams are shaking things up. The new Prince and Princess of Wales, both 40, competed in a bartending battle during their surprise trip to Northern Ireland today. The royals stopped in Trade Market, a new outdoor street food and retail market in the heart of Belfast, where they headed behind the bar for a friendly competition to see who would be the fastest to create a cocktail. Who did it better? The Princess and Princess of Wales' Twitter account captured a clip of the couple racing to make drinks. Working from separate stations, the royals quickly poured and shook the spirits, reuniting to toast and sip the mint-garnished pink drinks. Prince William and Kate are known to show off their competitive sides on occasion during royal outings, whether facing off in a sailing race or rolling dough balls at a bakery.
Is that the line there? Yeah, then 50 mil of that, and then we're going to say thank you, miss you.
Cheers to them. That's our programme this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Melissa Ntonwaka. Bye for now.